Welcome to the podcast where we celebrate innovation for a happy planet. I am your host, Abigail Carroll. I was tempted to call this week's episode Unhappy Planet because this episode grapples with what happens when your startup doesn't go as planned. When I learned that Courtney Boyd Rey shuttered her seaweed startup AKUA, I reached out to see if she would come on the podcast. Given that over 90% of startups fail, and even 75% of those backed by venture capital do as well, I wanted to address the issue heads on. So many lessons can be learned. By many measures, AKUA was a slamming success. It was a pioneer in its field. They had over $600K in annual revenue, and they'd raised over $5 million in funds. Courtney fell from a pretty high bar. I had seen Courtney pitch years before, but I wasn't sure what to expect from our call. What I found was a light and peaceful woman who is still on a mission to save the planet. Welcome to the podcast, Courtney.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Well, I am thrilled to have you here. You are the CEO and founder of AKUA. You made seaweed hamburgers, seaweed crab cakes, all sorts of seaweed-based products, and you had a great run, but things didn't finish the way you expected. And I think this is an incredibly important story to tell. So I really appreciate your being here. Tell me a little bit about how you started AKUA and what was your vision for this company?
Yeah, so I was turning the corner on 30. This is actually a decade ago, and knew that I wanted to commit my time and energy and career really to addressing climate change. I wanted to have a really good answer when, a future grandchild asked me, what were you doing at this pivotal time in history while the world was burning? And I've always been attracted to the food industry. I'm someone who eats and lives very healthily. And I think part of my healthy food journey came about in reaction to my dad's actually unhealthy food journey. My dad was one of the top big food marketers in the 1980s, working for companies like Burger King and Pepsi and Kellogg's and Frito-Lay. And so I knew a lot about how these big food companies had gotten folks, more or less addicted to sugars and processed ingredients, and thought, maybe the food industry could be an amazing vehicle for change in terms of eating healthier and eating more in line with the planet. And so then was sharing this, kind of lofty aspiration with friends, and just randomly, a very dear friend named Brendan Coffey said to me, well, I'm working at a nonprofit called Green Wave, and we are basically helping to create the regenerative ocean farming movement. And I thought, that sounds cool. And he told me a little bit more about how it involved kelp farming in the New England coastline. And I'm from New England, Connecticut, and Cape Cod. And I've always loved seaweed. Like so much. And so, yeah, I was like, okay, we have an opportunity here to create a food company based on an entirely new way to grow food. And that's how AKUA came to be.
So what was it that attracted you to seaweed?
Love the whole category of, seaweeds and mushrooms and kind of these more Asian inspired food sources. I love all Asian food, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Thai, you name it. And, I thought it was just kind of weird that in some parts of the world, people eat seaweed every day. And yet in the United States, we almost never eat it except for the nori wrapped around our sushi. Yeah. So I just saw it as like a big white space as well to go after.
Right, because seaweed also has particularly high levels of nutrients that we may or may not be getting in other food sources.
Exactly. I mean, I used to be able to rattle off all the vitamins and minerals in seaweed. I'm a little rusty now that I'm a few months out of the AKUA journey, but it's just really a superfood powerhouse, and I used to be obsessed with kale. So getting obsessed with kelp was pretty easy. And I think, for us New Englanders, there's something very romantic about growing up near the ocean and getting our food from the sea and being able to work with, these sort of fishermen turned ocean farmers or ocean gardeners, if you will. I'd always also been a huge advocate for the plant-based movement. And so this idea that, we can garden in the ocean and take our plant-based food sources from the sea, I loved that as well.
We're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. I'd like to thank Gulf of Maine Research Institute and Bold Ocean Ventures for their support of Happy Planet podcast. GMRI and Bold Ocean Ventures have partnered to create a mission-driven venture capital fund supporting the growth of innovative, sustainable, ocean-related businesses. Listeners may remember Patrick Breeding, who was on our show last year to talk about Marin Skincare and its clinically proven formula that uses glycoproteins from Maine lobsters to treat eczema and dry, damaged skin. This company has since become wildly successful with this lobster lotion, and Patrick is inviting listeners to a 20% discount on their products by using the coupon code HAPPYPLANET on their website, marinskincare.com. I use this product myself, and I highly recommend it. Welcome back to Happy Planet. I do think there are a lot of parallels to the seaweed food industry and the kale phenomenon that happened. So you had this idea, you wanted to integrate seaweed into people's diets. So you started this company, AKUA, and tell me a little bit about your products and how that went. Because you got really far in this venture. Like this was,
thank you.
By all measures, this was a wild success. And I think that was part of the reason that there was, I certainly was very surprised to get that email in August saying that you were selling the last boxes of your products. You fell from a pretty high marker point. So tell me, what products did you make?
Yeah, it's funny. We made so many kelp-based products over the years. We've started with kelp jerky and kelp pasta. We made kelp spices. We even made kelp kind of like granola balls at one point. And we made kelp crab cakes and kelp burgers and 5 different flavors, and then our ground meat, which we sold into food service. And we were just about to come out with a new flavor of the ground meat actually before we decided to shut down. And then we also the last thing was actually a fish-based product, a salmon kelp burger we were going to introduce. So I don't know, what is that, like 10 products maybe? And, that's a lot of R&D. That takes a lot of money and time to do all those products. But we were trying to figure out the right product market fit. We were trying to figure out the right product profile when it came to looking at what's successful in the food industry, which is, high margin, high velocity products like chips and candy. So, I think looking back, probably the one product that we should have made that we didn't was maybe just like seaweed gummies. I feel like I've learned a lot about the American food industry, and I think if we had just done maybe like gummies and chips.
So back to your dad's success.
Exactly.
Then you're like, okay, let's make this healthy product as least healthy as possible, and that will please the American palate.
Because that is what works in America.
That's kind of depressing, to be honest. But you're the first ones trying to make packaged food out of seaweed in the United States? Because I'm wondering, having to do all this product research to figure out what is the right product market fit, were you a victim of being so early in this movement? Because all that kind of fell on your shoulders.
Yes, I remember telling someone who had been a veteran in the food industry what we were doing, and he said, oh, watch out. First person out the door generally gets shot.
Yeah.
And as I was winding down the business, I was in an incredible amount of stress and back pain. And my dad said, well, that's because the pioneers are often the ones with arrows in their backs. So I think that when you're a first mover, it can be really exciting. And that's what inspires me as an entrepreneur. But on the flip side, you do have to spend a lot more money, time, and resources on educating a market and creating that market. Looking back, maybe we should have waited 10 years to start AKUA. But at the same time, if AKUA didn't start, then waiting 10 years wouldn't have made any sense. Right. So someone needed to get out there and do it. I wish we had had more financial success for our investors. But as you said at the top of the call, I do agree with you. We were a success in so many ways, and we had a great run.
How far did you get? You had all these products and you were out in the market and you seem to have a pretty good direct to consumer project. I got emails about burgers and you had pretty good distribution, if I recall. Is that accurate?
It is, yes. So at the, end of 2023, we did around 600K in sales that
Yeah.
year. You know, year over year, we were kind of 500 to 600K for
Yeah.
3 years flat. And
Yeah.
we didn't have a lot of growth, but we also kind of had switched from like being a kelp jerky company to like selling kelp burgers online to like getting
Yeah.
into retail. And really at the end of the day, we just ran out of money.
Yeah.
We couldn't make the company profitable and run it with a growth mindset. We couldn't raise more money because the VC markets just totally dried up
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we didn't have the numbers. We were still so early stage. Investors thought
Yeah.
it was too big of a risk. I think could have made it if some other circumstances were not true, such as like just in general the recession the country and globe went into, but also like the just rapid decline of the plant-based movement. I think companies like Beyond and Impossible lost a lot
Right.
of market share. They took a
Yeah.
lot of companies down with them, like us. And so, even though Akua was kind of like the anti-Beyond, we were just so healthy and real food in comparison, we still got lumped together in that plant-based category,
Yeah.
and investors didn't want to touch it.
Yeah.
And then I think consumers also same in the same way, even though again, consumers who paid a little bit of attention knew that we were better for them, they just had a distrust of the plant-based food industry too. And you had a lot of people coming out saying that actually eating a plant-based diet is not healthy. You should eat animal proteins. And I still see it every day in my Instagram feed. And it's kind of sad. I mean, the pendulum had to swing
I was
very
just
far
gonna
into the
say.
plant-based. Yeah, it very far into the plant-based spectrum. And so maybe it went too far and now it needed to come back. So yeah, we just got, I think, kind of creamed by some of those timings as well.
It feels like that's how it's all working, right? We've got these pendulums and the swings in politics and in markets. They're just growing bigger and wider. When the foundation started to show these fault lines, how did you try to address it? Like, were there very specific actions that you were taking to try to get out of this zone and get to the next level before you called it quits?
I remember in 2022, we still had cash in the bank at that point, and we made a decision heading into the summer of 2022 that we were going to still keep spending marketing money because summer was our biggest revenue month for burgers, and
Hmm.
we just kind of risked it. And looking back, I should have just been making a lot of cuts much earlier. I had a really bad CFO at the time who had this mentality kind of like, just keep spending and you're either going to raise more
Yeah.
money or go out of business. And it was so dumb. And I should have just, when I raised money, pretended like it was the last money I was ever going to have and figured out profitability from that point. But again, we were still in this like VC backed growth mindset, and wanting to show that growth meant spending marketing dollars. So we went into summer 2022 spending that money, keeping a lot of people on staff that we probably shouldn't have. If I'm completely honest, I also had a baby that summer. So I was like kind of just trying to stay optimistic and keep the status quo as opposed to like, coming back from my 2 week maternity leave and just like firing everyone. Like I needed people
Right.
around me to like build that company. And so, as we sort of headed into 2023 and it was apparent that fundraising was not going to get any easier, that's when I started making the layoffs. My co-founder also left at this time, which was really hard. It was the right decision that he left, but it didn't make things any easier on me as the kind of sole founder at that point. And yeah, again, it was just, at this point, sort of one quarter after the next, just making cuts.
Yeah.
And what was so hard about that is I felt almost schizophrenic because I would be spending half my day pitching the dream and the vision to buyers at grocery stores and investors about how amazing everything was. And then I'd kind of have to come back to our team and have these very realistic talks. And and fire people, but also be inspiring and that it was all going to be okay, even if it wasn't. So that was really hard. I think 2023 was a really tough year. And looking back, I think, of course, there's all sorts of different things we could have done, such as, you know, stopped certain channels of sales. Like we kept running direct to consumer, which was expensive. We kept running retail because everyone said you had to keep your retail numbers out. Once you win a store, if you go out of stock, they're not going to ever let you back in. So we just kept, sort of growing in those channels when really looking at food service, that was our only profitable channel. And we should have turned the lights off on everything else, just focused on what was working, even if it meant super small revenue, and kind of go into this like hibernation mode much earlier. We got to that decision, I would say, as we headed into 2024. And at this point, though, we really needed our current investors to stand up and put a little more money in. And some said yes, and the ones that we needed to say yes didn't. And so we made the call in April 2024 to shut things down before like our debt got serious, right? Like we were winding things down pretty cleanly. There's definitely a few people we owe a little bit of money to here and there. I think they've mostly forgiven it or haven't answered emails. But if you push beyond that stage, you can end up in really serious debt. And I didn't want to do that for obvious reasons. And so, we kind of called it before it got really ugly.
Yeah. I think everybody listening is just going to feel that pain. You talked about these multiple facades that you have to have. And I think that's also why I want to talk to you and get that out there. This is a real thing. Even the people on my podcast, these entrepreneurs filled with hope, and you're a salesperson, and you have to tell the best story, and it's really hard. And I think there are so many struggles as an entrepreneur that it's really important to kind of demystify, some of that sort of struggle of being a marketer, being a realist, and let the truth come out too. I think a more frank discussion with the investors could reap better benefits.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'll say that our investors, like at the end, were so incredible and amazing. And this wind down process has been oddly peaceful. And I think part of that is I was just super communicative throughout the entire company journey and in touch with all of our investors. And then when this sort of email went out that we were closing shop, I don't think anyone was necessarily like taken aback. And I think most of them like really conveyed to me that they felt I had left it all out on the field, And our board meeting, like in the decision to shut down, I mean, granted, we had just the most two wonderful people on our board who are two of my closest friends over this experience. And it was all just kind of like, we did everything we could. When in hindsight, the timing was tough. Raising at the top of the market in 2021, into the plant-based decline, getting copied by a competitor, going into the VC winter, which started with the Silicon Valley Bank collapse. We made it through COVID, but also the product and the concept, like we said at the top of the call, was early. America wasn't ready to eat more kelp. And so it was almost like just a very beautiful experience these past few months, especially in contrast to 2023, which was grisly.
It sounds brutal. And I think it's brave. I think it's brave just to know when to call it quits. Like this isn't, for whatever reasons, this is not going in the right direction. And rather than dragging everybody through more pain and more uncertainty and letting spark fizzle out, you said something earlier about the fundraising. You should treat the money you raise like it's the last you're ever gonna get. And I do think we are in this mindset in these startups that, there's more, I mean, granted, it's been really tight. And so the startups have been tightening their belts a little bit, but there is this sort of nonchalance about fundraising. Like, okay, we've done our first round. In 18 months, we'll do our next round. Like, it's just this sort of bottomless pit of money that's going to be available. And I think that it's a very dangerous mindset to be in. And I think it's very smart to have an attitude that this could be the last money. You're lucky to have it. And if you're a consumer-based product and you can't see your way to profitability within a relatively decent time frame, there is probably some rethinking to be had.
Yeah. And, I think any entrepreneur is lucky that they're starting today when so much more of that framework around building towards profitability is part of the conversation from day one.
Yeah.
And in a very unhealthy way, it was so different in 2020 into 2021. We were in this explosion with free money basically everywhere because of interest rates and post-COVID stuff. And so, we were told by very smart people, don't worry, the money's always going to be there. Like, don't focus on profitability, focus on top line revenue. And I mean, honestly, it wasn't even until 2023 that I even knew what a contribution margin was,
Right.
which is like a pinnacle point of running a business. Because up until that point, it had all just been about grow, 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 grow. The money will always be there. So I think it's amazing with an entrepreneur who's starting today, who's going to build just a very different kind of business. But you do need growth capital. It's important. And so it is kind of sad that I think it's so hard to raise right now in the food industry because it's going to set innovation back a lot.
Yeah. So what do you think? Because there are competitors out there with AKUA. So are you bullish for the seaweed food market? Because it also seems like there's an American palate that may be a little bit incompatible with a big, huge growth of kelp-based product. What is your gut on that?
We sold our recipe to our kelp farmers. So it's my hope that
Nice.
they can carry on the torch and sell our ground meat into food service alongside their oysters and scallops and everything. So, I wish for the best for the industry, but I do think that there's something to be said around the American palate on a mass scale. I'm in fear of this upcoming election and just how many people out there don't care about the food they put in their bodies or the environment. And so we're just going to deal with this upside down world we live in where people are just going to continue getting cancer and we're just going to keep poisoning them and we're just going to keep putting band-aids on problems as opposed to actually getting to the root of what's going on. It's just really sad. And the best thing we can do is just keep ourselves educated, educate our friends and family, and make those choices for ourselves and support the companies that are also helping us make those choices. Mm. So with seaweed, I think it's always going to be, seen as kind of an Asian food source in America. And probably the best thing to do is to kind of lean into that. I love Atlantic Sea Farms seaweed salads. I think that's a great example of a product where you're taking something that already exists, the like bright green gross noodles that I eat sometimes that are served at Japanese restaurants. And they actually come out of this huge bucket and they're filled with food dyes and sugar. I try not to think about that. And they're replacing it with like a really healthy kelp salad. So I think that's an example of a product that's really smart. I think kelp burgers, seaweed burgers had its moment in time in that plant-based food rush. But when that's over, I think people are going to probably just gravitate back towards grass-fed beef burgers if they're smart, or just the old school bean burgers. And so I think it's about kind of figuring out what America already eats and tweaking it. I think that's the best way to get kelp into the market versus kind of creating these whole new products with it.
Yeah. So you've been through a lot. How are you feeling?
Yeah, a lot of people have asked me this over like past couple months, and honestly, ever since I'd say like May, I've been feeling great, like really great. And I think so much of that hard pain that I went through was like a year ago now. And so even storms run out of rain sometimes, is what my friend always tells me. And so there was just, it wasn't just going to keep storming, right? So when we had that clarity in April, it was actually right after Earth Day, to wind down the biz, I remember I went out into my mom's garden. I listened to one of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver, and was just listening and writing. And I had my baby girl right there, and we were drinking tea, and it was like 3 p.m. and I'd normally be like hacking away on phone calls, and it was just spring was coming out, and I just remember feeling really light and really peaceful. And it's just gotten better from there. I think I took a little bit of time this summer. I worked part-time here and there, and was sort of more at like 20, 30 hours a week versus 60, which felt great. And to be in a place right now where if Romy gets sick and has to stay home from school and our nanny can't work, like, and I have to put things on hold for a day, I can. Like, I don't think I could say that a year ago. It was just every day was like fighting for our lives. So I'm really grateful to kind of just be a bit more flexible right now. And yeah, I think so grateful for the journey, and then so grateful to be out of the food industry, because it is such a slog. It is so hard, and I will never well, knock on wood, but I will never in a million years start another business that depends on a supply chain ever again.
Yeah.
It's just better ways to make money, Abby.
We want all the advice you could give here. I think that's amazing. I also love how light you feel. I didn't know what to expect from Courtney on this call. I actually saw your pitch years ago with Sia had, and I'm just delighted to find you so buoyant and peaceful. Part of the reason I wanted to have you on is I want to demystify this idea of failure. I think a lot of people are afraid to get out there, afraid of raising money, for all the disappointments that could bring to somebody else. And I think you're just a great person to talk to, because I think you're just physically, you're here to show that there's life at the end of that story, and that is not the end of the world.
Yeah, and I just hop on the phone to a few founder groups, people who are going through it. And one of my best friends texted me today, and she's got like a Series D funded healthcare startup, big, big, big. And she's just like, I'm so stressed. And I was like, what is your path to being a chairwoman or selling this thing? Because it's like, you don't have to take it all the way, right? Like, someone else can carry that burden, or you can sell it, and you don't need to maybe make the billions and billions of dollar exit that you promise people, but it's okay on the other side. And I was lucky, because as I was going through the AKUA shutdown or trying to decide what to do, one of my good friends, actually, who was in the portfolio I was in of plant-based companies, she had shut down her business, and she had gone into about $600,000 of like personally guaranteed debt on that road. And that was sort of one of the biggest signs to me of like, okay, I don't want to go as far as she went. Yeah. I wish I had known more when I started. I only listened to podcasts of success stories, and so wasn't aware of what climbing down the mountain looked like.
Yeah.
I think it's important that people know it's not always these Kellogg's buys you for $600 million type RX bar exits.
Well, I think you're getting onto a really interesting point here. We are in this culture now, here and in Europe. In France, I'm part of a Paris Business Angels, and President Macron has done so much for promoting small businesses and startups, and he wants the startup economy, and we idealize them. And now we've created all these accelerator programs, which in themselves are startups. But I feel like we're promoting this mythology of the entrepreneur and glorifying it. And I wonder if it's really that productive to be incentivizing so many people who might not have otherwise become entrepreneurs to become entrepreneurs. We also need people to run companies. The number twos and the number threes in those companies are often the real motors that are actually getting stuff done.
Yeah, I remember when it was 2010, and there was this sort of like tech bubble forming in New York City around startups. Like, WeWork was starting then, and a bunch of other cool ones. And people couldn't hire because everyone was starting companies. And to your point, like, it was just, you need, like, I in the foreseeable future will not start a company. I am so excited to bring all the things I learned to other CEOs, who are building their companies and align my dreams with their dreams. And at the end of the day, sleep a little better at night
Right. Right.
because the buck doesn't stop with me at the end of the day. And so I, I think some people can't help themselves. They're just serial entrepreneurs. I don't actually think I'm exactly that. I'm a dreamer and I'm a storyteller and I'm impact driven. And I kind of was forced to be a CEO because no one else wanted to build AKUA and it needed to exist at that time. So yeah, I think a lot of people get into it for the glam of it, and that's definitely not the right choice.
Yeah, it's
Or the
brutal.
right
I mean,
motive.
it is a brutal endeavor to run a company and to start a company, especially
There's
when you're
a
pioneering.
Yeah, and there's the CEO of NVIDIA, I think is the most valuable company in the world today.
Right.
And he has this great quote where someone was saying, "Would you do it all over again?" And he was like, "No." He was like, "It was so hard."
Totally. Totally.
And then I think you add family into that mix, and like whether you're a dad or a mom, or it doesn't even have to be family. It could be you have a parent that dies, or someone in your family gets sick, or a friend, and it's like all of a sudden like these things that are the most important things in life, right? Our friends and our family and their health. Something happens, and you can't do it all. It's like almost to be an entrepreneur, everything has to be going well in the rest of your life, which is not reality. So you have to like take that into account too. And I think when you're young and you're in your 20s and your 30s, it's like you have a different like risk appetite. But now as I'm hitting 40, and I have a kid and we'll probably have another kid next year, it's just like, yeah, I think I'm my husband has his own company too, actually. So,
Right. Two
you know,
entrepreneurs is a complete
yeah. So
nightmare.
I'll just spend my time, helping him, and then, I'm got a new job I'm starting next month,
Oh,
excited
great.
about.
What are you doing?
So I So I just to back up a little, before I started AKUA, I was part of this community called Summit, and we bought a mountain in Utah. We raised about 50 million bucks from entrepreneurs to come and live on the mountain, and it was this really cool community. We hosted events all over the world, and it's still going on. So I consult with them still. It's an amazing entrepreneurial community to be a part of. The founder of Summit, one of four of the founders, he this year bought half of a safari lodge in Kenya. And the safari lodge, it's actually like basically run and owned by the local Samburu nation in Kenya. And they have this amazing nonprofit that supports local community preservation, land management, and they have a baby elephant sanctuary called Briteti, where after the mama or daddy's been killed, they will bring the orphan elephants back and they will raise them and rewild them. And they have this amazing milk to market program where all the local Samburu women are making formula milk for the elephants. And so I'll be coming in as their like chief growth officer next month, and
Amazing.
yeah, continuing my work in impact, but instead of shouting about kelp all the time, it'll be baby elephants.
Well, I look forward to getting those emails. Who
Sure.
doesn't love a baby elephant? Can they eat kelp? Will that help elephant flatulence?
Exactly. I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting working so far from the oceans. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I imagine. So, does your experience shape your feelings about this brush for the blue economy and climate tech? I mean, are you feeling less optimistic or more optimistic about it?
I think we're going to know in a couple weeks
Right.
what's going to happen with the election is going to definitely play a part. And I think there's positives and negatives to both candidates in some ways. I mean, obviously, a Kamala Waltz presidency would put more environmentally friendly policies in place. But on the flip side, if someone like Trump comes into power, you get a lot of rallying within the private sector to create the change they need to see in the world. So, I'm not like doomsday about Trump. I mean, it's just going to be appalling. But I mean, you live in Maine, right? It's a very split state, depending on
Yeah.
who you talk to. So I think that's going to impact a lot of how the future of this. I think there's a lot to be excited about within climate tech and tech in general. And I think the people who are feeling the pinch are the ones who are not touched by tech. They're in food, or they're in
Yeah.
like the nonprofit space making sustainable materials. There's still a lot of money going into climate tech, which I think
Yeah.
is awesome. So I'm very bullish on climate tech and as it relates to oceans too. And then I think things like the food industry are going to continue to go through a really tough time.
You just mentioned nonprofits, and I've been wondering if some of these companies that I'm seeing coming through wouldn't be better served as nonprofits.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
AKUA should have
yeah,
been a part of Green Wave.
interesting. Okay.
We started with them at the time. I just thought to myself, I don't really want to run a nonprofit. I don't want to be constantly asking people for money all the time. And the thing is, that's exactly what you do when you run a for-profit too.
Right.
So yeah, yeah, we should have been a part of Green Waves. Green Wave even admits this. Looking back, we both feel like it should have just happened under their umbrella. But I didn't know enough about nonprofits then, and now I
Yeah.
do, and now I'm entering that space, and I think you can create a lot of really positive impact in nonprofits. It's annoying to always be asking for money and not have a sustainable business model, but I'm actually looking at ways to create a more sustainable business
Right.
model at Sorara and Ratetti, like doing a lot of partnerships with really cool brands where a percentage of, the revenue gets
Yep.
donated, and just thinking through what are the recurring revenue triggers so you're not asking high net worth individuals for checks all the time, or
Yeah.
maybe finding one high net worth individual to really be that long term partner. Because anytime you're asking people for money all the time, you're not building the business, whatever it is,
Right.
nonprofit or for profit.
Right. But I think a lot of nonprofits are finding these little revenue streams. Maybe you can sell little
Mm-hmm.
like elephant teddies or something.
Definitely.
Squidderless. Do you have any advice for other entrepreneurs today?
I think that you got to be crazy optimistic, unreasonably so, when you go into starting a business. So even listening to this and knowing what happens on the other end, put it out of your mind because like the only thing that's going to get you through the ups and downs of that startup cycle is just being completely unreasonably optimistic.
Well, that is a feature of most of the entrepreneurs I've met, just unbridled optimism. Speaking of optimism, are you optimistic about the climate and where we are, where we're headed?
Well, so my husband's fund invests in solar and battery infrastructure. And so I've been working with them a little bit. And I think the clean energy movement is very promising. It does need governments to help back it and help with that transition. Here in Portugal, it's looking really good. Obviously, that's a very small country, so it's kind of easy to make decisions, easier. When it comes to factory farming, I don't know. I haven't looked at the stats, but I think that that's going in the wrong direction. And when it comes to transport, we have to get off fossil fuels. You can eat all the kelp burgers in the world. It's not going to move the needle until we get off fossil fuels. That's it.
Right.
And we just saw all the hurricanes that racked Florida, the floods in Chiang Mai. There's incredibly devastating droughts across Southern Africa right now. I mean, it's just no debate that this is getting extreme and scary. And so that wake up call has to happen around energy. So I don't know whether I'm feeling positive, honestly, but I would hope at this point it's becoming much clearer to people who maybe didn't see the problem before.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's hope. Well, I just want to thank you so much, Courtney, for coming on the show. It's just been an absolute delight to talk to you, and good luck with all these new ventures.
Thank you so much. Great to talk to you as well.
I must say I was amazed by Courtney's resilience on this call. But I guess the benefit of being a mission-driven entrepreneur is that the startup can die, but you can hold fast to your mission. Courtney may not be slinging kelp burgers, but she can help the planet by helping baby elephants. I wish her well in that journey. Thank you once again for listening. Please follow Happy Planet wherever you tune in and leave us a rating and review. Happy Planet was reported and hosted by me, Abigail Carroll. I am also the executive producer. Composer George Brendel Egloff created our theme music. Learn more about my work and get in touch by visiting happyplanetpodcast.com.